What is the interest in ghosts from? Is this a new interest, or is this something that's been haunting you for years?
I am haunted. Yeah. No, it's a lifelong thing. I didn't sort of think of it as an obsession until I was asked about what my obsessions are, and I was gonna say other stuff like science fiction and stuff like that. You know, really really nerdy stuff, which I'm into a lot of nerdy stuff. But then I just kept thinking, well, I'm at the moment I'm writing, I'm starting to write a new album, and it's kind of at the moment the sort of core influence and inspiration is a lifelong kind of experience and obsession, and sort of not always a positive one, but yeah, an obsession with ghosts and just that everything around that really, from personal experience, from the sort of culture of ghost stories in different cultures as well as our own, as in England, sort of having a kind of fear of it too. I think because it's a fear, I think it's become something I feel that I can't let go of, and a challenge that I'm sort of finally addressing. I don't know if my album will end up being about ghosts, but it's the inspiration for it. So I've spent a lot of time over the last year kind of gathering stories from people, recalling my own, kind of rereading ghost stories, watching ghost films, all things that I've done anyway, but just with a conscious kind of thing in mind to sort of build what it is. Really kind of just like work out what is it about ghosts that kind of plagues me, but also just that, you know, there's some aspects to it that I find really interesting that have come up just around kind of people's psychology and culture, just social, what's accepted socially. It's a really interesting kind of intersection of.
And what is the interest? Is it actually the interest in the phenomenon of them actually seeing a ghost, or is it just the way people deal with death and the mystery of death?
You know, I don't even think about death. Obviously, that's quite a big part of ghosts. But for me, it's the interaction. It's the interaction that people have, or experiences that people have had with encounters or feelings of places in the now, in reality, in day to day, you know, bog standard reality. And I think it's the sort of interruption of that, the uncanny that always draws me in. I think just since being a kid, my dad was really into ghost stories. My very first childhood home was a very old house built on a Roman road. And I grew up with just this awareness of things being slightly strange there. I didn't grow up in fear, but when we moved up to North Yorkshire when I was around 6 years old. And as I grew up in Yorkshire, it was kind of all the memories of that house sort of were there permanently, and I used to remember what things that I'd seen in the house that I didn't really think of as a young child. And then we had conversations when I was a bit older. Oh, what was that? You know, what was that black dog in the bedroom doing? You know, that thing that I used to watch when I was a kid, when I was in my mum and dad's bed while they were asleep, just sort of looking around. And it all kind of came to light later that, you know, there were a few things that happened in the house, or there are things that we all saw in the house. And it just sort of went on from there. There were other family stories. My grandma was very, very sort of casual about a ghost that haunted her house. It was actually more of a pest than a kind of, whoa, wow, weird thing. It was more of like this bloody thing just keeps hiding stuff and just won't go. And you know, things like that, just very day-to-day, everyday life type of situations. So it's kind of grown from there really. And I think as a phenomena, I think I'm always into things that kind of take you out of the kind of mundanity of life and give you a chance to kind of reflect on the mystery and the unknown. And it's just been a thing that I've always been interested in, and simultaneously scared of too. So in my adult life, in recent years, since I've had my children, my oldest is going to be 5 in May, and I've got a baby. Since having those, I've kind of developed a sort of recurring dream about poltergeists, and it's been kind of growing in its kind of intensity throughout. And I think, you know, it comes with the anxiety of being a parent, I think, but at the same time, they're really clear dreams, and I have had these dreams throughout my life, but in this sort of last 4 years, they've just been like really regular. So I've been trying to sort of work out what that is. And in the dream, it's kind of, I'm in this very large house with lots of rooms, and there's, which is a bit of a cliche dream for most people, but there's always a ghost present, or I know there's a ghost and I'm waiting to encounter it, or it kind of takes me by surprise, and it's this overwhelming, unstoppable force. So yeah. I've been sort of thinking about that a lot and trying to kind of work out what that might mean.
Do you think there's actually an explanation for this? I mean, what do you think it actually is? Do you think it's something that your mind, maybe your mind's playing a trick, or do you think it's actually a rational, almost scientific explanation, or is it just good to have it in the realms of mystery?
It's a good question. I mean, probably throughout my life, I've probably attributed it to different things. I think when I was a kid, growing up in a sort of relatively Christian household, I would have probably said, yep, it's, you know, it's the afterlife or whatever, and that people never die. I don't really believe that now. I don't really have a religion that I ascribe to. I'm very into the whole unknown mystery of things. At the same time, I think believing in ghosts, even talking about ghosts, you know, without a sort of tongue-in-cheek, I think it's hard, because I think there's a bit of kind of stigma about it, and I find that really interesting. You know, I grew up with this thing that was very natural and strange when you reflect on it, but a real thing. And, you know, whatever it was just a thing, and it was just there. It was like an echo. For me, I genuinely don't know. I think eventually there might be a way of explaining it through a branch of science that we haven't fully understood. I don't know if it's like related to sort of, you know, I know nothing about science, but I'm interested in like the whole idea that when you look up at the sky and you see stars and things in you know, the photographs of deep space, that's all ghosts. You know, they're not there anymore. That's just the image that's taken its time to get to us. So I kind of think of it in that way. But at the same time, I've heard the most incredible stories about encounters with ghosts, with people who have died years prior, and, you know, the person didn't know, and they're just really everyday and normal. So it's a mystery that I don't think will ever be solved, but I think there are so many people that have these experiences, for it to be a real thing, but that just, you know, kind of defies explanation and defies, you know, any interrogation, because you never know when or where or how it's going to happen. And unfortunately, there's that whole thing of like, you know, Most Haunted and all the TV stuff around it, and that, you know, the kind of dripping letters, and horror films have kind of built this kind of brand of believers in ghosts to be very kind of tacky and you know, entertainment, which, you know, is kind of its history. I'm interested in the whole history of, you know, seance and Ouija boards and things like that. I find the whole thing really fascinating.
So it's more about the perceptions of reality, in a way, isn't it? That maybe reality is not so cut and dried, not so black and white. There are blurred edges. Do you think that's more what the fascination is, more than actually ghosts per se?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely that, you know, this, you know, what we see and what we experience day to day is not all there is, thank God. Because if it was, you know, that's a bit dull, really, isn't it? I think there's obviously the reassurance for people who've lost people, and you know, they're desperate for that kind of connection, and to know that, you know, it isn't permanent, if you know what I mean. Yeah.
It's interesting. If I talk to scientists, they don't poo-poo these ideas. You know, you mentioned the stars before, and they are ghost stars because they're not actually there anymore, are they? The light only just got here. Mm-hmm. And they do talk about the multiverse, and all the multiverses are in the same area. Your room now is 1 million multiverses. Mm-hmm. So I often wonder if you're actually peering into a multiverse when you're seeing a ghost. You know, there are split realities and blurred realities. Mm-hmm. So there may even be a scientific grasping at these kind of ideas.
Yeah, I would love. I really sit on that side. I love sort of cold hard theory, you know, applied to things like this, which are kind of, you know, whimsical, and, you know, there's folk tales, and there's the woman in black or the woman in grey, or, you know, there's just all these kind of cliches of ghosts, but which I also love. But I genuinely think this is a thing that happens, and that people don't talk about unless they're into it, unless they have a reason to talk about it. I don't just meet someone and then just start hopping on about ghost stories and stuff. It takes a while. It's a private thing. But when I did a bit of research earlier this year, earlier last year actually, for a project I was doing in York, I was asking people. I just asked on my own Facebook, just to sort of, just to kind of get a bit of a little pool of ghost stories, and I heard from people that I was at school with that I would never have thought would like have had any experiences, let alone be like, want to share them. But they did so, and quite privately, and just said, I've never told anyone this, but this thing happened and I've always been terrified by it and I don't know what it was, but I just wanted to tell you. And I just had about 50 of these amazing stories. Some were kind of genuinely incredible tales, not even tales, but real experiences. And I just thought, it's got to be a thing. It can't just be a figment of the imagination. My manager Steve, he's I hope he doesn't mind me sharing this, but he's told me one of the most amazing stories of when he was a student and he just moved to London, and he was living in a house. I can't remember what part of London it was. It might have been South London. But he ended up having this. In short, he had an encounter with the landlady of the house, or the previous owner of the house, and he thought she'd just come to visit, and she took him into his room and said, "This wardrobe, my husband made it, and you got to look after it, okay?" And he was like, "Oh yeah, all right." And he had this kind of long, ongoing, very lucid, everyday, nice chat with this lady, and then found out that she'd passed on, sort of, I don't know, 5 or 10 years ago. And I just think things like that are just lovely. They're just, what on earth is going on? But at the same time, it's just really quite reassuring, quite lovely.
Yeah, it's interesting how it can manifest itself out in a very physical way like that, or it could just be a feeling. Like a room can feel damp or edgy, or there's something you can't, it's intangible. Yeah. And I was also thinking just that time to the idea that actually is more than 5 senses, but we don't really understand the other senses. So maybe this is our brain trying to make sense of the other senses or feelings that we don't quite understand. Do you think that could be a rational explanation of it? Or
probably. I think you have to have I think there are people that have that sense and there are people that don't. Whether or not that means you can experience something or not, I don't know, because I think some of the stories that I've had would suggest otherwise, would suggest that anybody can have this experience. Other people are more attuned to it. I'm definitely attuned to things. I haven't. I've seen this thing as a kid in my parents' bedroom. It turned out, I think there was a dog. The farmer lived there with a dog or something, and the dog just wanted to stay around for a bit. But I haven't actually seen anything sort of else that's kind of really definitively this experience. I'm just really fascinated by it. But other people that I've spoken to have had these really lucid experiences, and that would be the only time in their life that they'd had that happen, and they would never have sort of expected it to happen. They wouldn't have believed it to be able to happen. So I think it's just this strange unknown, isn't it, that we can't. I think you're right about the sort of reality sort of slipping in and out, I think. But I also definitely believe that places can store a feeling, or buildings can. I've had it numerous times. I've walked into somewhere, actually mostly in London, funnily enough. So underground stations where I've just felt almost like a wall of atmosphere change, like walking through like a curtain of atmosphere change, and just feeling ultimate dread, just that kind of, oh fuck, what is that feeling, like real panic, and just thinking, what the hell, whoa, what's going on. I've had it in a few music venues in London as well, and I definitely think there's a sense somewhere that's or a radar or whatever it is, just that picks up on these things, or doesn't.
Does this feed into your art and creativity? There's definitely a spook spectral vibe to a lot of the music you make, which is quite interesting because it's music that's digital, and and it's always a challenge, which a lot of people do resolve, of creating an atmosphere or a feeling around the machine, the ghost in the machine, quite literally. And is that something you're conscious of, and is that something you play around with?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the nature of my vocal is sometimes it's almost always described as haunting or ghostly. So I've never been able to shake that. It's always kind of been there, and I think it's just the atmosphere and the treatment, the electronic treatments I put it through. It kind of just has that eerie quality, which I really thrive on it. I thrive on recreating that live or in the studio and performing that. I think I'm definitely thinking now, after a few albums in, just what I get out of it mostly is just there's a power to being able to create that sort of atmosphere, and it's the same as when I was little and I used to enjoy telling mates about ghosts, and you just kind of, it's quite a commanding power that you can have when you're kind of scaring people. So when I'm able to do that through music, it's even more powerful, I think.
Yes. Also your kind of persona, your performance persona, kind of shape shifts. So I was just wondering if that was playing into it as well. Is there a sense of playing with reality as well, or different realities, and some of them are some of them meant to be blurred realities?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, figments of a person, of a character, of a time, of a feeling. I think you could definitely place the persona that I create into that kind of ghostly other world, for sure. They are aspects of me, I would say, but at the same time, it's this kind of warping. Yeah, this kind of warping of elements that kind of sets it apart from just being a straight delivery, if you know what I mean.
I mean, kind of switching it around. I mean, would you like to come back as a ghost?
Oh God, it depends. It depends if I'm conscious or not. I sometimes wonder if there's a consciousness to them or not. But I don't know. It depends. Maybe not on this planet. Not right now. Maybe in the deep future or something, or just or send me back in the past. I don't know.
Well, and the idea that time doesn't really exist, and there's all different times going at the same time. Do you think maybe we are all ghosts anyway? There's always kind of really bizarre theories about the universe and life, and that we actually are in the Matrix, and we're all floating around in it. And does that all play into it as well, or do you prefer the more traditional idea of like the trad ghost idea?
I'm not sure. I think I was reading recently about someone who was studying, and I've forgotten their name, so I won't include that. Someone who was studying out of body experiences in people who'd gone through, or your near-death experiences, and people who'd gone through operations and stuff like that. And they were trying to kind of just build a bit of a library of these experiences to try to get a bit closer to the possible science behind them, because they're so prevalent. And it's so hard to understand how someone can see the process of their surgery when they're under the knife, when they're under anaesthetic. So I was really interested in that whole idea that they put forward, that that perhaps possibly that that our souls they're not housed in our body. They are temporarily, but they're not permanently. And it would explain quite a lot, really. I mean, there's a lot of things it doesn't explain, and there's a lot of questions around that itself. But I think if that's a possibility, then wonderful. If we're not just sort of limited to this sort of bag of flesh and bone, then that's quite a beautiful, reassuring thing, isn't it?
So in a sense, the fascination initially we talk about it was a fascination of ideas or death, what happens afterwards. But actually, really, it's a fascination with life and what is life.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Got it on the head.